I could tell things were going to pieces between Lydia and me. We spent our last afternoon together arguing with each other while she tuned and loaded the ferocious old Monte Carlo she used to wheel around in, a huge clunker. A relic of the old internal combustion days with the V8 ripped out and replaced with what I called army surplus bazookas but what Lydia lovingly called her confetti makers. With well over 1,000 pounds of batteries in the trunk and back seat, the thing handled like a bear. But then Lydia tended to drive straight toward her targets until she rolled over them, so that was all right. Lydia opened her right fender magazine using a rusty wrench and expletives from several different languages. "I don't want you to go," I said. "Tonight. To the duel." Liquid brown eyes flashed as delicate grease-stained hands loaded the rockets. "We've been all over this 1,000 times before, Jack," she said. "These people are my friends. I've been in the club for years. The Commodores challenged us to a duel in the ruins on neutral territory, and we have to accept. It's a point of honor." She put an edge on her voice, "But I don't think you understand that. Instead of trying to talk me out of going, you should be coming with me. Don't you have any pride when it comes to something like this? No. You and the rest of the animals know the kind of resources the Commodores draw on. They got at least 3 retired professional duelists, half a dozen ex-Texas Rangers, and just as many millionaire playboy types who have nothing better to do with daddy's money than buy hot cars and hotter guns. Jesus Christ, they've got guys driving imported 9900s, and you're going to take them on with stuff like this. I drive a Mitsui, and I still don't see any honor in committing suicide." The access panel closed with a final chunk. End of maintenance, end of conversation, and quite possibly, end of relationship. I stared at the Monty while she changed from her coveralls to her battle armor. The urban animals were a motley bunch of auto nuts, gun nuts, and homicidal maniacs who were kept together by a mutual need for camaraderie and spare parts. I liked most of them. They threw good parties. They were going to get themselves exterminated. Lydia returned, dressed for a fight. Damn, she looked good even with all her curves hidden behind those black ceramic plates. She slid into the driver's seat, flipping switches with her left hand as she buckled her helmet over her sleek black hair with her right. Rolling down the window as she backed out, she yelled, "You're a coward, Jack Freeberg," and was gone. The word was still hammering at my brain as I guided the 500ZX Terminator into the Checkers Pizza parking lot. I pounded the wheel with both fists and cursed Lydia for being such a fool and myself for being too smart to go with her. Coward? I had more than twice as many road kills as she did, and she knew it. Still, the word stuck in my gut and left me with a sick feeling no amount of rationalizing could shake. Okay, if that's the way she wanted it, that's the way she could have it. There were plenty of other ladies around. Mama Dunbar glared at me through a cloud of steam from oven number 1 as I walked in off the street. She was wearing the Death Drives a White Ford t-shirt that Lydia and I had given her last Christmas at the staff party, which reminded me that there had been no other ladies for quite some time. "Hey, Burger, what the hell do you think this is?" she bellowed, wiping tomato sauce from her puffy white hands. "A vacation resort? You're 40 minutes late. Get into the locker room and get your uniform on. Raoul's been covering for you, but I think he's starting to get annoyed." And remember what Raoul did the last time that happened. I blew her a kiss and muttered unrepeatables under my breath. Raoul was pacing back and forth, nervously puffing on a cigarette. When I came grumbling into the locker room, he had shoulder pads in his jacket and his hair was pulled back neatly into a ponytail, so I decided he must have a date tonight with one of those Votech girls he was always chasing after. He said he was looking for a wife, but I think he was just looking for a free mechanic. He gave me a short lecture on what a sorry, ungrateful putz I was while he cleaned out his locker. By the time he left, I was starting to feel like everyone I knew had decided to dump on me at once. I was still in that state of mind when the first call of the evening came in. The fellows over at the university wanted 5 large pepperonis, extra cheese. I hurriedly strapped my Checkers Pizza We Deliver sign to the roof of my car while Mama went to work at the ovens. This was one order that I was going to be sure was delivered within our half-hour guarantee. Those boys were in the middle of finals and were probably pretty testy. I didn't need any trouble tonight of all nights. Minutes later, with 5 large extra cheese pepperoni pizzas piled next to me in the front seat, I screeched out of the parking lot and into the deserted streets of the city. Things looked pretty calm tonight, but then I was still inside the downtown fortifications, so that wasn't too surprising. I'd have to go through the ruins, south of Central Enclosure's safety, to get to the university, but I didn't expect any trouble from the scavengers who lived there. Compared to big cars, like the Kane Intercontinental, the 500ZX Terminator is cannon fodder, but it could still cream a crowd of pedestrians armed only with baseball bats. The cops at the south gate looked us over a bit longer than usual before letting the 500ZX and me roll out of the no-dueling zone and into no man's land. More Uzis than I like to think about were prominently displayed in the hands of frowning bluecoats, and I thought I could see a couple of guys up on the wall with mortars. My guess was that someone had told the cops about the little party the Commodores were planning tonight, and they weren't taking any chances on it spreading into central enclosure. As I maneuvered among the bombed-out buildings and tattered tents that made up the ruins, I let my mind wander back to the thoughts of Lydia that had haunted me all evening. Somewhere among these debris-strewn streets, she and her friends were forming into battle lines. Was I a coward? Should I have gone with her? The answer, I decided, to both questions was an emphatic no. The urban animals didn't stand a chance, whether I was there or not. I could just hope that Lydia had enough sense to know when to run away. The sound of small arms fire in a building off to my left jolted me out of my reverie. Damn it, Jack, I said to myself, this is no time for daydreaming. Get your mind back on your work. It'll help you forget the trouble Lydia's in. And I wheeled around the next corner into a wide, empty boulevard with the animals 3 blocks behind me and the Commodores half a block in front of me. It looked like I was going to be part of this fight after all. I didn't have a radio, but I knew Lydia would recognize a black X-Terminator with Checkers pizza markings as me. So as my windshield starred with the first 50 caliber slugs, I stomped the brake pedal, gave the wheel a spin, and skidded around to present the enemy with my best side, the rear. I watched in my mirror as I pulled away from the Commodores. I could only see 5 cars behind me. A white DT with the machine gun that had sprayed me, a station wagon rebuilt for ramming, 2 jet black 9900s with turrets that spelled LASCR, and something low and silver at the back of the pack that looked vaguely familiar and very dangerous. Something strange was going on here. The feature on the Commodores and Texas Monthly a few months ago had put their vehicle count near 30. Where were the rest of them? The animals had turned out in full force. I spotted Lydia's Monte Carlo on the far left side of the formation. The club president, Jojo Monroe, was leading the charge from the back of a Jeep driven by Bunny, his wife. The old fool was hanging onto his tripod-mounted recoilless rifle with one hand, waving on his troops with the cowboy hat in the other, and yelling at the top of his lungs, "Come and get what's coming to you, Commodores." At least a dozen other animal vehicles were tooling up behind him. As their ranks parted to allow me through, the Commodores started shooting. A painfully bright green line of laser light flashed outside my left window, leaving red after images dancing on my retinas. It charred a lovely hole in the hood of a sky blue Thresher owned by some skinny kid named Bernard. He weaved a bit but didn't break formation. A few cars down the line, a Beetle with 4 Sparrowhawk heat-seeking missiles protruding from the hood wasn't so lucky. The DT hit it with a dozen or so incendiary rounds from its 50 calibers, and the whole front end lit up like a fireworks display on Sam Houston's birthday. The driver, a chunky young lady called Sledge, just had time to roll out the door before the rockets went off. 2 launched and spun off to the right into a deserted storefront, blowing out 10 feet of wall on the second story and showering the street with rubble. The other 2 must have exploded in their racks because I heard a whomp and turned my head just in time to see the front end of the Beetle engulfed in a ball of flame and lifted 4 feet off the pavement. As the rest of the animals sped past the burning wreck, Sledge picked herself up, snapped the safety off her Scorpion, and ran like hell for cover. Lydia and her friends returned the greeting with admirable effect. The 9900 that had zapped Bernard caught at least one of Lydia's anti-tank rockets and some recoilless fire from Jojo. The right front fender and wheel parted company with the rest of the automobile. Other animals blasted away with various and sundry other types of weaponry, and while their results were not nearly as spectacular as those achieved by my little girl, several expensive-looking Commodore paint jobs were ruined. I turned around behind the animal lines to watch the fight. It looked like maybe they had a chance after all. But why had the Commodores sent only 5 cars when they could just as easily have sent 30? It didn't make sense. Then I heard a sound that gave my stomach the flip-flops. From behind the ruined buildings came the dull whoop 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 that meant one thing: helicopter. And knowing the Commodore's reputation the way I do, I was willing to bet my best pair of boots that it wasn't the LaserVision 4 eyeing this guy out looking for some film at 11. The chopper swung around the buildings at the end of the street. All black she was, with the golden skull and riding crop of the Commodores stenciled on her nose, and she was bearing down on the battle like an avenging angel of death. The animals were so intent on pounding the ground forces that they didn't see her until she was right on top of them, and then it was too late. The gunner must have been wearing a Cyberlink. Nobody is that good on manual. Within seconds, he sliced open at least 4 animal cars like frogs in a high school biology class. Suddenly, the street was full of twisted armor and fleeing drivers. But aside from the advantage of their air support, the Commodores weren't doing well. The wounded 9900 was struggling to escape from the Monte Carlo's big guns. After ramming an X9, the station wagon couldn't separate its bumper from the smaller car's chassis, so it was dragging it around the street like a terrier worrying a rat. The X9 was already totaled, but the wagon driver would occasionally crush it against a wall or another car for dramatic effect. The white DT that had taken out Sledge was backed against a building, taking potshots at the tires of animal cars as they sped by. He blew the right rear on Bernard's Thresher, and it fishtailed over a fire hydrant before going into a roll that left it upside down and smoldering on the sidewalk. While the driver of the DT paused to switch on his windshield wipers, Jojo popped up from behind his overturned Jeep with a law rocket on his shoulder. The section of wall immediately above the Commodore car exploded with a whooshing kaboom, and the vehicle disappeared beneath a big pile of rubble. Jojo blew a kiss to the still visible White Hood, then quickly dove beneath his Jeep as the helicopter's Vulcans clattered overhead. Lydia cornered the crippled 9900 and fired 2 anti-tank rockets into its radiator grill. As the whole front end of the car fanned out like an exploding cigar, bits of power plant rained onto the street, and the laser tube on the roof gave a final flicker and died. Blinking through his shattered windshield, the driver smiled at Lydia's artillery and slowly raised his hands. Score 1 for the good guys. At that moment, the Monte Carlo caught the attention of the Commodore flyboys. 2 air-to-ground missiles slipped smoothly from their racks beneath the chopper, and gracefully trailing streamers of white smoke homed in on the automobile. They detonated on the trunk, vaporizing a good quarter of the rear deck and badly cracking the rest. Lydia tried to bring the Monty around to get the bazookas pointed at the bird, but the old clunker was just too slow, and before she even had a chance to shoot back, they opened up with the Vulcans and shredded the back end of her car. Cracked batteries and incendiary ammo don't mix, and by the time she was halfway out the door, the Monty's rear was an inferno. As she ran, the fire spread, and seconds later the remaining rockets went off in their clips. Boom. Lydia's car was in pieces all over the street. I had been sitting back watching the fight from a safe distance, but seeing my little girl out of her car running around in the street where anybody could shoot her by accident made me very nervous. I decided that it was time for Jack Freebird to get involved. I pointed the X-Terminator toward the fracas and gunned the motor. We shot forward. I was a bit lighter in the arms and armor department than most of the vehicles I had seen tonight, but pizza delivery usually requires more in the way of speed than firepower. So I was betting that if I could get Lydia in the car, we could outrun whatever might decide to follow us. Weaving in and out of smoldering wreckage, I noticed that the brawl was coming to an end. Only 4 urban animal cars were still on their wheels, and they were skirmishing with the other 9900 and the chopper off to my left. Someone had mercifully shot the tires off the station wagon, and now it lay half on, half off the sidewalk to my right. The X9 still clutched in its jaws. Drifting smoke and a fine mist from the broken hydrant filled the air. I could see Lydia hiding behind Bernard's deserted Thresher with her pistol drawn. Beyond her crouched that low silver car whose lines I'd been unable to place. It had held back during the fight, but now it unmistakably had her pinned down. I tried to keep the Thresher between me and the silver car as I steered toward Lydia, but it could see me coming, and it got a few shots off at me just the same. Slugs from the single recoilless muzzle that protruded from its front end spanged off my armored hood. They chewed up the finish pretty bad, but it looked like I'd be okay if I could get away before he nickel and dime me to death. I skidded to a stop less than 10 feet behind Lydia. Apparently this came as a surprise to her, because when she heard the screech of my tires, she spun around and emptied a clip into my right door panel. When the smoke cleared, her look of terror faded to one of embarrassed recognition, and she ran toward the car. As the door slammed shut behind her, I gave the 500ZX the juice, and we roared off in the direction I came from. As she snapped another clip into her Tex-Mex War Surplus 45, I smiled and said, "I told you to carry something with a little more oomph than that antique your father left you." "Jack," she said. "Yes," I replied. "Shut up and drive. Aren't you even going to thank me for saving your life, dear?" "Thanks. Now shut up and drive. I can't say I blame the lady for being testy. Having your car shot out from under you does that to you." As I floored it, I glanced in the rearview mirror. We were pulling away from the Thresher at a pretty good clip while the silver car was just coming into view from behind it. I could see the helicopter finishing off the remains of the animal pack, but it didn't seem to be paying any attention to us. I felt safe. Then I looked back at the silver car and the feeling faded. In the split second I'd looked away, it had cut the distance between us in half. Wait a minute, I thought. They can't make cars with that kind of acceleration. Then something inside my head went click. It was 2 years ago, in the August issue of Car and Driver and Guns and Ammo, that I'd read a feature on gasoline antiques. I remembered particularly vividly a photo of the fastest production car ever built. They called it a Vector W2. 2 years ago, I'd been amused. Vector meant directed speed. Now I was horrified. 2 tons of directed speed was burning its way up my tail. Literally burning, I might add. Electrics are safer and cheaper than internal combustion, but when it comes to speed, the old IC can't be beat. I braked down to 40 and squealed around the corner, leaving most of the battle behind. Unfortunately, a critical part of it was still on my tail and closing quickly. The Vector's driver started in with his recoilless rifle again, and I felt the 500ZX shudder each time a shot slammed into its rear armor. I tried weaving to throw off his aim, but the old gas guzzler handled like a jet fighter, and he stayed right behind me, hammering away. As the speedometer passed 60, I turned to Lydia and tried to smile. "Look at it this way, honey," I said. "Things can't possibly get any worse." At that moment, the black chopper appeared above a deserted bank building to our left. Apparently, it had finished off the remaining urban animal cars. Never once to be satisfied with a mere victory, the Commodores were looking for something more along the lines of an extermination. Lydia and I, in the 500ZX Terminator, were the only obstacles between them and perfection. We were going to be removed. The bird was maneuvering a bit erratically. It looked like the tail rotor had taken a hit and was no longer working quite right. Thank the Lord for small favors. The Vulcans still rattled away above us, however, and incendiary bullets rained down all around us. Zippo loads are expensive too, and I was beginning to wonder how they could afford to be shooting it off right and left. The back window shattered and a spray of plastic slivers and 2 or 3 bullets from the Vector pounded the windshield from the inside. I slid down in my seat and drove, looking through the steering wheel while Lydia squeezed off round after round from her .45 through our missing rear window. A rubber band gun would have been about as effective, but I appreciated the gesture. Suddenly all the shooting stopped, except for Lydia, who kept popping away with her pistol until the clip was empty. I glanced behind us and saw that the Vector was inching toward us, closing the distance between our bumpers to 4 car lengths. 3 car lengths. 2.5. 2. After a few seconds of confusion, I realized what the slime ball was planning to do. He was trying to get close enough to target Lydia and me through the shattered window without hitting the rest of the car. Lydia realized the same thing. He was a half car length behind us, the muzzle of his gun looking like a black gulf ready to swallow us up, when she said, "Damn him. Everyone knows you're supposed to shoot for the car, not the driver. It's just not sporting." "Neither is this deer," I replied and dropped a load of mines. I don't think the poor dumb putz knew what hit him. He should have known better than to tailgate a Checkers pizza car anyway. When you're on a run, you don't have time to stop and tango with any crazy that takes a dislike to you. So you turn tail and discourage them from following you. If he just hung back, he would have had plenty of time to avoid the things, and he could have had Lydia and me for lunch. It never pays to get cocky. The first mine went off under his front tires. I saw the flash in my mirror, and the concussion rattled us pretty good. One of his wheels bouncing off to the right, he went into a skid and set off another firecracker. The second blast heaved the right side of the Vector into the air at precisely the moment its driver needed all the traction he could get. At 70 miles per hour, the thing went into a roll, bouncing off the ground, spinning several times in midair, then bouncing off the ground again. And every time it hit, it spewed twisted metal onto the street. I sped up in anticipation of the inevitable. Seconds later, the fireball mushroomed behind us. There are certain hazards that go with owning an antique. Although a serious threat to our health lay blazing in the street behind us, our celebration was short-lived. Our friend in the sky opened up on us again with his Vulcans, this time with a vengeance. Incendiaries smacked into my rear deck, igniting the plastic armor wherever they hit. The black chopper was low on my tail. I started wishing I'd bought the optional surface-to-air missile rack instead of the sport trim. Mines don't do a whole lot of good if their intended victim is 10 feet off the ground. I had just about given up hope when we zoomed past the main gate to the university. A ray of sunlight broke through the clouds. Like Central Enclosure, the university was a no-dueling zone. If we could make it into there, the Commodores wouldn't dare follow us, and I realized joyfully the boys at the residential entrance were waiting to let us and the pizzas in. As I circled the university looking for our way in, Lydia dug a fire extinguisher out from under her seat and was trying to use it on the rear deck. The chopper kept her pinned down most of the time, but every once in a while it would have to dodge a tree or building, and then when the shooting stopped she'd stick her head out the shattered rear window and spray foam onto the flames. As soon as she'd put them out though, the gunner would get us in his sights again, and she'd have to duck back inside as a new batch of incendiary slugs rained around us. I saw the gate ahead of us and started honking the horn. Figures on the wall looked up from their books and grabbed their submachine guns. They were ready to open fire when I saw them recognize the bullet-ridden Checkers Pizza sign still clinging to my roof. The gate started moving and I aimed for the widening gap in its center. We were approaching faster than they could open it, and I wanted as much of the car as possible to make it inside. We threaded the needle with no room to spare. The gate's edge neatly sliced off my left side mirror and molding. There was a sickening pow as the unretracted gate spikes blew all 4 tires and we fishtailed violently to the left. I struggled to keep control and sparks flew as the bare wheel rim skidded across concrete. The back end slewed to the right, then back to the left. We spun completely around twice, jumped a curb, and finally came to rest against a stately oak. I turned on the wipers to clear the leaves off the windshield and through the cracked plastic saw the helicopter come over the wall after us. This was not a smart move, particularly during finals week when the weapons system engineering majors needed a way to blow off steam. I counted muzzle flashes from at least a dozen different windows before a crew on the dorm roof fired what looked like a senior design project cannon at the hovering chopper. They blew the tail right off the thing, and with the stabilizing rotor gone, the whole craft went into a nasty spin. There was a very satisfying crunch when it hit the parking lot. Before it exploded, the pilot and the gunner piled out and ran like crazy for the closing gate. I hope they had a nice walk home. I turned around to ask Lydia if she was all right, but before I could open my mouth, she grabbed my head with both hands and gave me a long, slow kiss. When we came up for air, she said, "I'm proud of you, Jack. I really am." I blinked. Why? Because of what you did. Because you did the honorable thing. I'm sorry I called you a coward, but I never thought you'd come looking for us like that to help us. Can you ever forgive me for doubting you, darling? I started to tell her that I'd only wound up in her fight by accident, but stopped myself in time. Jack, I said to myself, here's your chance to get back on our good side. There's nothing to forgive, dear. After you left, I thought about what you said and decided you were right. So I headed out in the ruins to find you and prove to you that I knew what was right too. I was ready to kiss her again when I heard a rap on the window behind me. It was some pimply-faced kid pounding on the plastic with his .44 automag. I rolled down the window. "Hey man," he said, "where's our pizzas? We ordered them 45 minutes ago, and you're supposed to deliver in half an hour." I cringed and Lydia's mouth dropped open. "Pizzas," she said. "Jack Freeberg, do you mean to tell me you were on a delivery run while I was out fighting for my life?" Her voice was getting shrill. Baby, calm down," I said. "This guy doesn't know what he's talking about. There must be another car on the way with their delivery right now. I don't know anything about pizzas." The kid said, "If you don't know anything about pizzas, then what's that the lady's sitting on?" I really wanted to slug that kid. Lydia raised up in her seat and stared at the greasy boxes underneath her. She dragged one out, opened the lid, and held it in front of my face. Next thing I knew, I had pepperoni pizza up my nose and spilling down the front of my shirt. Blinking tomato paste out of my eyes, I heard the car door slam and the click-click-click of Lydia's dueling boots walking across the parking lot. I thought of yelling to her to come back and we'd talk about it, but I realized it wouldn't do any good. In her eyes, I had betrayed her, and that was that. The kid bent over and tapped me on the shoulder. "Hey, are you going to give us the pizzas or not?" I turned and glowered at him. "Sure. Checkers Pizza." I decked him with a left jab through the window. "We deliver."